Welcome to the Hidden Bookcase. Come in, have a seat, get comfy.
It's just next to the sliding library ladder and right below the shelf titled Dark Academia.
Pick a book, your favourite book. That's the one that opens this room. Inside you'll find a warm fire, a loving cat, and a wide skylight to the stars.
And a really towering to-be-read pile.
I'm Morgan, I use they/them pronouns, and I am a mountain of bees lovingly crafting you cake.
I'm Sorren, I use he/him pronouns, and I'm a gluten-free lemon poppy seed muffin forgotten in your bag.
We've been friends for 10 years and are always swapping books.
But despite having the same taste in books, we never get round to reading each other's recommendations. It's always just another book on the pile.
It's a seriously big pile now. It might crush me in my sleep. So, each month we're going to force each other to read a book.
The new reader will give a blind summary of the book. We'll both go away and read it, and then we'll return to chat about it.
So this week, let's get to talking about...
The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern.
So, Sorren, tell me about the Starless Sea.
I happened upon the Starless Sea in probably appropriate Starless Sea fashion during my first week working at a bookshop. It was one of the first books that we had that was an independent exclusive edition since I'd started working there. And it was absolutely beautiful. I was immediately taken with it, and I was given instructions to photograph it and put it up on the social media, so I read a little bit about it so I could say something appropriate about it. Having spent some time with it in a cupboard and with some fairy lights and taking photos of it at various angles, I immediately knew that I needed to steal an independent edition of this book for myself because it was the prettiest thing I've ever seen, and I immediately knew that this job would be very expensive. So, The Starless Sea follows Zachary Ezra Rawlins, who is a college student who discovers a strange book in his college library, which is called Sweet Sorrows. It's sort of an anthology of fantastical stories, and he's shocked to discover that his childhood self features in a chapter of this book. So he obviously begins looking into the origins of this book and gets drawn into a world of secret societies and underground libraries, and the tales from Sweet Sorrows begin to intertwine with Zachary's narrative. So, Morgan, should we listen to your blind reaction to The Starless Sea?
Let's do it. Let's see how this goes. Okay, so I actually have no idea what this book is about. I'm assuming Dark Academia. I've been told it might be due to... it might have video games in it and libraries. I think it starts at a university, but I have no idea. I've read The Night Circus before, so I'm expecting lots of description, lots of vibes, maybe less plot. It's got a key on the cover and a bee, which is very vibey. I hadn't noticed before it's got a silhouette running on the front and the back, so I'm expecting chase scenes. Or maybe it's metaphorical, maybe it's, escaping your own problems through fiction. And it's got a sword on the cover, which is very pretty. Yeah, I have no idea, but I'm excited to get started.
I feel like your escapism guess is pretty on point.
I see that this book is recommended by you. I see that this book is about a university student.
Oh my god.
I put two and two together.
How could you do this to me?
Listen, we are both very similar people when it comes to this.
I know.
I think everything I knew about this book before I went into it was things that you told me, like the video games thing.
Can't remember when I said that to you, but I feel like I vaguely remember having a conversation about it a long time ago.
A while ago.
Because one of the things I do really like is that it treats different forms of media as equal. It doesn't look down on, it mentions cartoons and video games and things like that.
That was one of the things I liked, is with Dark Academia, it's usually so obscure. But with this, it was great because they'd be making references and I'd be like, oh my god, I understand that reference. The fact that they haven't even said where it's from. Oh my god, they're talking about the magicians, they're talking about Locke and Key. Oh my god. And it matches, the sword and the bee.
Yes, speaking of the cover.
I like how it looks like a traditional bound book with the sort of marbling on the cover.
It has a little thing that says author of the Night Circus on it, which I usually find kind of annoying. But because they've made it look like a library sticker with a name, I don't mind it so much. I feel like it blends nicely into the aesthetic.
I think it would have been cool because on the inside pages, there's a silhouette running through a door.
Yeah.
But it's in a very blank library. And I would have liked something like one of those library stickers, who's checked it out. I think that would have been really pretty.
Ooh, that would have been very clever. I like that a lot. Possibly from the Library of Keating.
Oh, yes.
It might have been so meta at that point that it might have become confusing, but we...
That's the whole point of this book. And I love meta-narratives so much.
I did recommend this probably quite transparently with the hope that you would enjoy the meta-narrative aspect.
Analysing story, it is my bread and butter. I love it. You have to romanticize your life. You have to think that you are the main character.
You have to.
So what are your thoughts on Erin Morgenstern's writing style?
As we record this, I'm in the process of reading The Night Circus, and I think her style, maybe it's more well developed here. I'm having a little bit of trouble with the very large cast in The Night Circus. Some of the characters I've occasionally confused for one another, and I think it's an unnecessarily large cast. I think some characters could be cut without losing anything from the narrative. Whereas here, it's another big ensemble cast, but I think Morgenstern handles it a lot better. And in terms of the prose itself, I mean, she has some really lovely, evocative turns of phrase.
Her, like, turns of phrase and her description and her, like, storyality? I don't know what the word is for that. But, like, narratorness is very good, and it definitely suits this book a lot better.
Yes.
It did take me an entire year to read The Night Circus.
That's fair.
Nothing happened until the last 100 pages, and I didn't know any of the characters.
As far as I feel like this does get going faster. It does still kind of take 100 pages to get going, which is slow, I think, for some people, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I don't really mind books where nothing happens. I have a lot of favourite books where nothing happens, so it doesn't bother me, but...
I think if I hadn't been trying to finish this for the recording, it would have taken me a lot longer to read.
Yeah.
The whole first half of the book, I was pushing myself. And then the second half of the book, I did just sit down on the floor and read 250 pages in one sitting and slightly terrify my flatmate. Let's talk Zachary and Dorian, though.
Let's talk Zachary and Dorian. How do you feel about them?
I mean, most of my notes throughout this book are just like, that's a bit of a gay thing to say to your love interest, or... I'm sensing a bit of a gay vibe. Or when Mirabelle and Zachary are talking about Dorian's name, and Mirabelle's like, oh, yeah, it's from Oscar Wilde. I went, oh, so he's gay. Right.
He is.
I understand. And, like, I knew going into this book that Zachary was gay. I didn't realise he was simp for the first man who whispers in your ear gay.
He just immediately falls in love with him, and usually insta love does bother me, but these two kind of make it work, honestly. Maybe it's just because I'm sick of, like, heterosexual insta love, and I just wanted a little bit of a breath of fresh air.
Going into it, I was like, okay, Dorian is on, like, a much higher standing because he, like, understands everything that's going on. Whereas Zachary has no idea what's going on and is sort of being just buffeted about in all directions. And then Dorian spent half the book unconscious.
He did.
And by the time they meet back up with each other and Dorian's like, I thought I dreamed you, they're suddenly on equal levels. The amount of competency that Zachary has really leveled the playing field for both of them.
Indeed, yeah. That scene in particular where Dorian asks a question and then Zachary says something very opaque and confusing. And he says something casual like, oh yeah, the Starless Sea, it's down those stairs. And Dorian's like, what are you talking about? Because he has no idea. To Dorian, Zachary is the mystery boy that came out of nowhere. And they are both that to each other, which is quite fun.
Yeah, like the fact that Dorian's never been to the library before.
Yes.
The fact that Zachary realizes that Dorian never saw the heart as it should be and is sad for Dorian not getting to experience that. The fact that Dorian's been slaving away in this whole world his entire life and Zachary just comes in, destroys the entire foundations of everything he knows in 2.5 seconds. It's just amazing. They're both so baffled and amazed by each other and in awe of each other. And I really think that's just so good.
They are each other's call to adventure.
There's this one offhand joke that he makes when they first meet up, and Dorian's like I'm losing my mind, but in a slow, achingly beautiful sort of way. And Zachary says, oh yeah, so you're feeling better then? And just immediately I wrote in my notes, like, they're on equal footing now.
They're on the same page, if you will.
I did like how we were introduced to Dorian as this very put together, organised, mysterious figure. And then we get the chapter from his point of view, the first one, where he's holding the secret history and is like, wow, I wish I could have this. Like, babes, that is very unhealthy.
Honestly.
But also the gay found family instinct is there. Just in my notes I said, brackets, I love you, you need friends.
He really does.
He's so lonely and he just needs somebody. And Zachary is that for him because everyone else treats Dorian as on the outskirts as sort of a nuisance. And then Zachary is like focused on Dorian, is the first person to focus on Dorian.
And I think it's very telling that when Zachary is going through his temptation, the thing that almost gets him is that image of Dorian at his mother's house. Cat is implied to be inside, the rest of his found family are sort of implied to be inside. He wants to embrace him in this way. It's very sweet.
Oh, yeah. I really love their relationship. I love how it grows. I love how we get to see both of them from either point of view. And yes, it does happen very fast, but because this whole book is about fate, I
Yeah.
don't mind it so much because it's never like their soulmates, but it is like their stories are intertwined.
That's very true. Within Love in a book, they'll see each other and they'll immediately be like, this is the person who I want to be with forever, and I would immediately die for this person. Whereas they don't actually do that. They just want to be with each other again and get to know each other. They don't just assume things about each other. At one point, Dorian wishes Zachary is there because Zachary might be better at puzzles than him, but he doesn't know because he hasn't had the time to get to know him. But he wants to know.
Yeah, the first hint we get that they're going to be maybe love interests is that Zachary summarizes the night by being like, excellent smelling man told me a story in the dark. I'm like, okay, that's a gay way to say it, but okay.
An incredibly gay way to describe somebody.
I think also the Sappho quote really cinched it for me. Like, someone will remember, as I say, even in another time. Also, the fact that Zachary recognizes it immediately.
Yes, of course
that is gay. Like, no heterosexual person recognizes that Sappho quote.
That's probably true. I don't talk to enough heterosexuals to know.
The last bit of Kat's diary, she says, so someone maybe somewhere sometime will read it and know.
Yeah.
Narrative parallel, echoing. Is she doing this on purpose? Because I love it.
I didn't spot that, honestly, but I feel like she probably was. And also, I mean, Kat is sapphic, obviously, so...
Yes, I love Kat. When we got to Kat's point of view, I got so hyped and I just raced through the last few chapters because I was enjoying it so much. The bit where we go 2 years into the future, oof, it had me stressed.
Yes, I think Kat's point of view is kind of a breath of fresh air and it grounds everything because at that point it's become very vague. Zachary's storyline, Dorian's, they're offered the Starless Sea, everything's very metaphorical. It's that reminder that people do miss Zachary as well, which I think is important because a lot of Zachary's struggles do revolve around that belief that he thinks that nobody will notice or care if he disappears.
Seeing Zachary from other people's point of view, how Zachary's like, I don't have any friends. Like, Kat talks to me sometimes because she knows that I'm lonely, but like, we're not really friends. And then Kat's like, we were so close to being besties. And Dorian's like, oh my god, they were almost a found family. He has no concept of the fact that he is loved.
Returning to Kat for a second, one of the things I really love about her is how her voice is utilised by the narrative. It's so different from the rest of the narrative. The way that she peppers in her likes and pop culture references and little references to things that she's doing.
I don't usually like a change in tense or person, but this really does work.
Yeah, I think because it's a written record, and we've had other written records as part of the book because we have Sweet Sorrows in there and we have the Ballad of Simon and Eleanor in there, so it feels appropriate. Who was your favourite then?
I mean, I love Zachary and Dorian.
Yes.
I love them so much. Wanted to be Mirabelle because
I
pink hair vibes. I knew you were going to think that Mirabelle was my type.
Mirabelle has the thing of being like a cool pink-haired fashion queen. She's also like an unknowable cryptid and a force of the universe. It's both.
Exactly. It's like the perfect mix. I loved all the characters. They all felt quite realistic and quite grounded and down to earth, which I think after the Night Circus was quite nice.
Yeah, I like that we didn't get a lot of backstory. We just sort of got random hints of things. For example, we know that Dorian was raised by Allegra and had a complicated relationship with her. And we know that he had a sister who died somehow, but we don't know how that happened or even how long ago.
Yeah, and like we don't know Allegra's backstory apart from the fact that she was the painter. And we don't really know much of Mirabelle's backstory apart from the fact that she was raised in the library by Allegra to a certain extent. I like that. I like the sort of vagueness.
I feel like it grounds you in Zachary's perspective a lot because he doesn't know these things, obviously. But then the thesis of this is that a story is an expanding thing and there's parts of it that you're not going to see. That rings true here because there are parts of it that you don't see. There's parts of it that just get implied.
I did like how many different stories were being woven together and how no one could fully comprehend the entire story. Like Simon went mad trying to figure it out. And Zachary coming in at the very end, sort of walking through this aware that so much story has happened already and that he is coming in at the last moment. There was this Tumblr post about the Magnus archives that was something along the lines of, and spoilers for the Magnus archives to a certain amount, across the seasons you slowly realise that almost every character you hear from is actually dead. And it slowly feels more and more like you're walking through a field of graves. Almost all the plot has already happened, and this is just the final segment. That was the exact feeling that I was having.
Yeah, it's almost got this post-apocalyptic vibe.
Yeah, I really like the psych out of being introduced to this whole world and being told how it works in Sweet Sorrows, and then actually arriving in the world and it is entirely different. Like, even Dorian doesn't know that Guardians used to have sword tattoos. He doesn't even know that that's the tradition that his tradition came from. He just knows that, like, oh, I have this sword necklace and we're supposed to destroy the doors because we're protecting the library. And just the post-apocalyptic feel. The world was slowly shutting down on itself. Like, the library is destroyed, the sea is rising, everything is falling apart. Cinch that all together with Zachary dying, the entire sea rising and seeming to drown him, the lights seeming to go, and the bees sort of trying to rush him towards the end. It just felt so eerie. And then to have that sudden still calmness of the dance. The absolute vibes. The painting as well. Can we talk about the painting?
Yes.
The one that has Zachary and Dorian together, and the fact that Mirabelle knew the entire time. She was like, I am the number one shipper. But also, like, I wrote in my notes as soon as I saw that description, I was like, they sound like kings of a broken world. And then if you think about it like that, then maybe actually the sword that's destined to kill the king is not actually destined to kill the Owl King. It's destined to kill Zachary.
I do love all of that. The characters from the stories within the story being players in this narrative, and it becomes clear who's who, and also that people aren't actually mapped exactly onto themselves from those stories, because that's not how stories work. And is it that they are that person, but that person was a metaphor, or that they're the metaphor? And I love that.
It's way more about the vibes than about the point. The Lost Cities of Honey and Bone, for example, it tells you absolutely nothing, but it gives you such a vibe that you understand exactly what's being talked about.
I think if you're the kind of person that really only enjoys hard magic systems, this is going to annoy the hell out of you.
Yeah.
But I like both, and for me this really scratches the itch of like a beautiful soft magic system and a very sort of Ghibli-esque world that you kind of only feel like you understand a small portion of, but it has that like wonder and awe-inspiring feel.
This feels like the sort of book that you need to immediately reread afterwards.
Yeah, I'm really happy that I got to reread it. Obviously it took me ages because I have so many things to read, but rereading it again, there were little things that I caught that I completely missed the first time. It was nice to know some things. Knowing that Dorian didn't know anything was quite amusing.
Like, I didn't know where this book was going the entire time, but I knew it would end well. It sort of built up enough of a safety blanket, and it felt like enough of a love letter to stories that it had to have a happy ending.
Taking into account the fact that it does have a happy ending, does that disqualify it from being dark academia?
Or maybe it's light academia, because I would define academia books by their intertextuality, by the way they rely on a knowledge of other texts. And like, yes, this is way more modern texts in the fact that it also includes video games and stuff like that. But I think it's just a modern take on dark academia, because it does need that referentiality or that intellectual setting. And I think it ticks both those boxes.
But does it take the dark box? Because I'm wondering if it's not dark enough.
There's no f***ed up murder.
There's no f***ed up murder.
There's murder, but there's no f***ed up murder.
To be fair, people get their hands cut off and stuff.
Yeah, but it's not very gruesome. There's no blood everywhere.
That's true. So does it count as dark?
I feel like you need to have blood everywhere. So maybe it's light academia.
Maybe it's light academia. Maybe we have to re-record the intro, or maybe we'll just leave this bit in where I acknowledge that we have to re-record the intro and then we don't.
I think at the end of the day, dark academia usually demonizes academia.
That's true.
Whereas I think this is sort of a love letter to it.
That's a good point, yeah.
I think that is how I would define dark and light academia. Because dark academia is usually focused on class issues, the inherent structure that is at fault, and how it corrupts and how it excludes.
Interestingly, yeah, the exclusion is a feature, but it's very much the villain of the story is the people who are trying to make the library inaccessible. But because you're not with them for the whole narrative, it doesn't feel the same.
Because I feel like usually dark academia follows the villains.
Whereas in this scenario, I mean, perhaps Morgenstern was thinking about the existing context of books that critique academic systems. There's no move to labour over proving to the readers that the villains are the villains. The simple fact that they're barring the protagonists and others from knowledge seems to be taken as sufficient proof of their villainy for the reader.
Yeah, there's never really a question of the main character joining them. There's never really a question of maybe they're correct. There's no seduction of power.
Even though they are promised exclusive secret knowledge, the end result is that they're completely barred from it. Some of them don't even know whether or not the library exists or ever existed.
I do really love how Allegra goes so far to keep the library safe that she destroys it. We love a good self-fulfilling prophecy. If you ever try to outmaneuver fate, you will cause it. The fact that you don't know how much she loves the library until after she's destroyed it, and then you get her point of view. I love how tragic that makes it on a reread.
Also, she just has so much style as a villain. She's so much fun in her faux fur coat with her tea and her slow-acting poisons.
The moment he drank from the cup, I was like, the poison is always in the cup, bestie.
A bit of an oversight. You've played a lot of video games, Zachary, come on.
I did initially find it a bit hard to differentiate Allegra and Mirabelle when they didn't have names, because they were both wearing white. But the Where the Wild Things Are reference made me incredibly happy.
Mirabelle's introduction in the Max ball gown is really good. I will say, I kind of wish that Zachary had called Mirabelle Max more, because it doesn't actually happen that often. And then when the keeper says, oh, you called her Max, I was kind of like, did he? I mean, he did a few times.
I appreciate the narrative not switching to Max. Originally, I was like, I'm a bit disappointed that it's still calling her Mirabelle. But then I realised how many different names this character has, and was like, actually, please stick to one. I'm so confused.
We get Mirabelle and Max and Fate and
the girl.
Arguably the moon.
Also the storyteller. The fact that she's the story crafter, but also the one who hid the heart of Fate.
But also Fate.
Which means she hid her own heart. I like it. It doesn't need to make sense.
I can completely understand. Like, I've seen negative reviews for this book that are like, it's too opaque, there's too much confusion, it's all folding in on itself. What is going on? I do get it. I can see why this wouldn't be for everyone, but personally, I am obsessed with it.
The lemony insanity is the point.
Exactly. I happen to enjoy that flavour of lemony insanity, and if somebody else doesn't, I get it. I can see it being a Marmite book.
Don't think lemon and Marmite go too well together.
No, I don't think they do, but maybe for somebody they do.
Maybe. Are you Marmite insane or lemon insane? Oh, so I had a narrative theory.
Yes.
Okay, so we know that Cat represents the beginning of a new narrative, the return to the start. Zachary symbolizes the end of the narrative. Dorian symbolizes the middle of the narrative because he comes in the middle, doesn't understand where he's come from or where he's going. This is my literary theory for you.
That's very cool. I like that a lot. I also like that whole message of if endings and beginnings are the same or naturally follow on from each other. That's a cool link between Zachary and Cat. They're both the linking phase of a narrative.
I did like the sentiment. Good stories are good stories if they feel like they keep going on after they finish. And I'm like, yeah, but I also want to know what happens next.
I would love a sequel for this. I don't think we're going to get one.
No.
But God, I would love a sequel for this. I would love more of this.
Like, I definitely feel like the point is that we end there.
Yes.
But also, like, pirate adventures of Zachary and Dorian, or new librarian Cat vibes, or literally give me anything. Yeah, so I rated this 5 out of 5.
I did as well. I actually think that I'm definitely rating it a 5 this time. I think I would have been cautious the first time. It might have been a 4, but on a reread, there's nothing else I want from this.
I definitely was on the fence for a little bit about giving it a 4, but I think it was so up my street and so vibey that I just had to give it a 5.
And to finish us off, do you have any recommendations for anyone who enjoyed The Starless Sea?
Having just finished Mrs. Death by Salena Godden before I read this, the personification of things such as the moon and time and fate and death felt very similar, and the sort of meta-ness of writing and being a character in your own book, I noticed a lot of similarities that I don't think I would have noticed if I'd read them apart from each other, because I read them immediately one after the other. I sort of saw that vibe. So Mrs. Death by Salena Godden. Oh, another thing, Gallant by VE Schwab. Just because the prevalence of ballroom dancing scenes.
There you go.
In both books is very... I mean, it's also got the hallowing of a specific book, treating it as sacred. The main character does that as well in Gallant. And it's sort of about putting together the past and figuring out the narrative that you've only stepped into at the very final moment.
My recommendation for this episode is going to be The Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman. It's another coming-of-age story, although this one has a much younger protagonist. And it similarly revolves a lot around the power of stories and narrative, and it kind of blurs the line between metaphor and reality. And it also has a sort of existentialist tone that matches The Starless Sea, where incomprehensible forces like time and fate, if you want to call it that, are explored in an almost eldritch and slightly horrifying way. It's definitely a book that feels feels like it was written for readers.
So next month is going to be spooky month. I'm going to be forcing Sorren to read Gideon the Ninth by Tamsyn Muir. I'm so excited about this. We're going to get a guest on, our first ever guest. It's going to be so exciting, and I can't say any more, but I am screaming. Until then, you're always welcome through the bookcase.
Don't forget to scratch the cat on your way out. Thank you for listening to The Hidden Bookcase, a production of Planar Prod. On this episode you heard Morgan Greensmith and Sorren Briarwood discussing The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. You can find out more about this book at erinmorgenstern.com, and you can follow Morgenstern at Erin Morgenstern on Twitter. You can find The Hidden Bookcase on Twitter at Hidden Bookcase, and on Instagram, Facebook, Tumblr and TikTok at Hidden Bookcase Podcast. Find out more about Planar Prod at planarprod.com. Know what we should read next? Or want to chat to us about what you thought of this episode's read? You can reach us at thehiddenbookcase@gmail.com or send us a DM on social media. We'd love to hear from you. If you're enjoying The Hidden Bookcase, please consider leaving us a rating or review, or you can always tell a friend how to find us. Your whispers are the best way for bookworms to discover our show. October is spooky month at The Hidden Bookcase. On our next episode, which will be out on Monday, the 10th of October, we'll be discussing Gideon the Ninth by Tamsyn Muir. We hope to see you then, and in the meantime, you're always welcome through the bookcase.